All right, thanks for coming back. We're getting near the end here. So here's some terms to know that can be helpful as you're thinking through what the Bible might have to say about this if you're digging in a little bit deeper or trying to figure out what's really kind of behind these debates. And so let's look at some of the Hebrew and Greek words that we see in the Bible that that are really what is, I guess, at debate being debated here. What's at dispute? Sheol is the first word we're going to look at. It's a Hebrew word, and despite the fact that the King James Version of 1611 translates this word as hell 31 times, which gives some the impression that the Old Testament is talking about hell a lot, and many assume that just means eternal conscious torment, it actually refers to the grave, to death and destruction, to some in one place a pit, and figuratively it refers to something of a great depth, something very deep. There's actually no obvious place in the Old Testament where it necessarily refers to hell as we think about it. Now, there's a couple passages that get a little bit close to that. So Isaiah 14:9-10 uses the term poetically to describe the place of all of the dead. And it also describes the people there as sort of like being conscious, that they're like, that they're calling. So there's a judgment against this king, and those who are in Sheol are calling out to him to come down, right? And that could either be someone who believes in eternal conscious torment, could take that as a fairly literal passage, whereas others will see it kind of more poetically, right? However, there are other passages that suggest that Sheol is a place where people lack consciousness and awareness. So I won't read them here, but you can look up Psalm 6:5, Ecclesiastes 9:10, and Isaiah 38-18, where Sheol is this place that does not have conscious people. Where a lot of scholars today are going to go is to not see Sheol as a word for hell as we think about it, but really just a term for the grave or for death. Now we move into the Greek, especially the New Testament, or the Greek translation of the Old Testament that we often call the Septuagint. And it's going to look at this word Sheol, and it's going to translate it as Hades. In the New Testament, the word Hades is used to describe death and destruction. It's also the place that the rich man goes to in the parable of the rich man and Lazarus that we'll get to a little bit later, Luke 16:23. In the book of Revelation, Hades and death are paired together, but they're also distinguished from each other. So there's something similar about them, but also something that could be distinguished. In the New Testament, Hades is usually understood to be the place of the dead, whether that's literal or poetic, prior to the resurrection. So we might call it the intermediate state. You're not going to see Hades in the New Testament describing like the lake of fire, the final judgment. It's always this kind of intermediate place. So you die, and maybe you're in Hades, as you see with the rich man and Lazarus, but that's not where you are forever. There's a day of judgment, and then there's another place you might go. Another important word in the Greek, and those who don't know, the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, is written in Hebrew and a few sections in Aramaic, whereas the New Testament is written all in Greek. So the word Gehenna is a New Testament term which means the Valley of Hinnom, and that's a place that's south of Jerusalem. And in the Old Testament, the Valley of Hinnom is a place where King Ahaz sacrificed his sons as burnt offerings to pagan gods. Jeremiah also references Hinnom. He has describes God promising to judge the people of Judah by turning the Valley of Hinnom, where they had sacrificed their children, into a valley of slaughter. The dead bodies of this people will be food for the birds of the sky and for the beasts of the earth, and no one will frighten them away. That kind of sounds like the worm doesn't die and the fire is not quenched, right? But once again, it's using that sort of destruction language at the same time, just like we had in Isaiah 66. In the New Testament, Jesus uses Gehenna to describe a place of final punishment. So we're not talking about the intermediate state. We're talking about what happens after Judgment Day. And in this place of final punishment, God is able to destroy both soul and body, according to Matthew 10:28. But also, it's where the fire is not quenched, Mark 9:43-48. So you can sort of see how an annihilationist and a traditionalist are going to argue with those verses back and forth, right? In Ezekiel's vision of a restored Jerusalem that we read in Ezekiel chapter 47 in the Old Testament, the healing waters that flow from the temple flow south. They flow actually, Ezekiel doesn't say this directly, but it would be true. The healing waters are going to flow through Gehenna and into the Dead Sea. And it describes making this Dead Sea where nothing can grow and nothing can live, suddenly hospitable for life because of the healing waters that flow from the temple. But they flow through Gehenna to get there. So now we have a universalist talking point, right? A couple other terms we want to look at. Tartarus, this is you don't see this one very much in the New Testament, but it's the place where angels who sinned are held for the final judgment to come in 2 Peter 2:4. So it's like a holding place for disobedient angels until they get their final punishment. In Greek mythology, where the word is going to be used more prominently, Tartarus is a place of torment that's below Hades. So Hades is the place of the dead. It's not necessarily a place of torment in Greek mythology, but Tartarus is. Finally, we have the lake of fire, which I'll just say it as it is instead of giving it to you in Greek. And that's the place of final judgment in the book of Revelation. It's said to be a place where the devil, the beast, and the false prophet will be tormented day and night forever and ever. But it's also described as the second death. Finally, death and Hades are thrown into it, which suggests that the lake of fire destroys them. So this is, okay, so I'll slow down here. I don't want to jump past that. So death and Hades are thrown into the lake of fire. What does that mean? So death and the place of the dead, or the disembodied existence, however you want to describe Hades here, they're thrown into the lake of fire. Is it because the lake of fire is going to torment death forever and ever? Or is the language supposed to be suggesting, the image supposed to be suggesting that death is being destroyed? Death is going away. It's being thrown into the lake of fire and thus destroyed. And what does that mean about other things and people that are thrown into the lake of fire? It would seem to suggest that they would be destroyed, right? That's what the annihilationist would say. But the traditionalist is going to say, well, I can see where you get that. But the passage here in Revelation also explicitly says that the devil, the beast, and the false prophet will be tormented day and night forever and ever. So these are some of the key terms and ideas that are going to be sort of disputed as we look a little closer at the Bible.